Jerry Acuff here with another installment of the Jerry Acuff Show. You know, today I'm excited to have Donna Mostrom here as my co-host. Donna is a powerful, successful millennial who I've actually learned from for the last 6 years. Today, she wants to interview me about what I think is the misunderstood millennial generation. So, welcome, Donna.
Thanks, Jerry. It's good to be here. I wanted to talk to you about your view on millennials because people often wonder if they are actually lazy or just misunderstood. And leading into that, the media, I think, gives a lot of bad attention, giving millennials kind of a bad rap on whether or not they're fit for this workforce. And my 69-year-old father also doesn't think that kids these days really work hard or even know how to work hard. And he always told me that I needed to put in my time before I could expect anything back. And in your opinion, do you think that millennials really need to put in their time and they're just being lazy, or do you think that they're misunderstood?
Well, my biases are misunderstood, and for several reasons. One is the studies show that millennials are far more, not likely, but far more likely to identify as work martyrs than any other generation. And they take less vacation than any other generation because of work. Now, where I think the disconnect is, just my point of view, is that you have this clash of two generations who view work differently, right? So Generation X and boomers think of work as traditional, 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week. It's 9 to 5, and it's when you get home you keep working. That's what they think. Millennials' point of view about work is completely different. I need work. I need to be effective. I need to pay off my student loans because the average millennial has $30,000 in student loans, which is about $300 a month for 10 years. And so they want to work, but they want to work differently. They want to work efficiently. They want to work with some degree of freedom. They prefer to work at home at sometimes if they want to. And I think you have this generational clash where one generation doesn't understand the other. And I think it's true on both sides. But I think the other thing that contributes to it, not to be too long-winded here, but I think it's about 30% of all millennials are actually under 25. Now, what we know is that by 2025, 70% of the workforce will be millennials. It's about 40% now. By the time that the millennials dominate the workforce, I don't have any question that nobody will question whether they're lazy or not. If you look at some of the most successful companies in the world, they were started by millennials. Facebook, Airbnb, Spotify. I mean, you can go on and on. And so it's really hard to label them as lazy. Now, I would also say, as a boomer, I know a bunch of lazy boomers. And so I think we make huge mistakes when we categorize people and when we generalize who people are. The kids that I know, and I know lots of millennials, I don't know any of them who aren't really, really hard workers, that aren't really committed to being successful. So if there are lazy people, they're probably just a part of the normal population of lazy people, regardless of what generation. But as a generation, I think my bias is, I think they're probably going to be the greatest economic boon to America and probably the world that we've ever seen.
So, do you think that they can actually change the stereotype, or do you think that time is just going to be the only determinant of they really aren't lazy? They don't have to prove anything, but they will end up proving that they are this strong force and that they can handle anything that generations before them plus have been able to.
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I think two things will happen. One is I think over time, as the millennials become more and more the mainstream in the workplace, they exceed 50%, that the culture in these companies will continue to change with it. And I think you're seeing a lot of that already. Which I think is actually really, really good. And the companies that can't adapt to the culture of the workers is probably a company that's doomed to failure. I think the other thing that's true, though, is that as millennials progress in the workplace, and I think now about 25% of all management positions are millennials, even though 40% of the workforce is millennials. Millennials are disproportionately more successful. But I think what happens is over time, as millennials become more successful, take on more responsibility, I think they'll begin to fall back on things that are more traditional. Not necessarily the way we work or how we work, but they'll understand that there are certain things that they missed as millennials, where I think education cheated them. Education did not teach them the value of one-on-one relationships with the same degree of efficiency that it did previous generations. And so many of them have learned how to create relationships using technology, but they'll find that insufficient as they get more and more responsibility and have more and more people reporting to them. So I think you'll have this sort of confluence of things where you've got the cultures will continue to change because there's a lot of millennials. And I think what the millennials will do is to begin to understand that some of these soft skills that I might have benefited from in other times, I probably need to learn how to do. And I think, the three to me that are most important are you got to be good at persuading people no matter what you're doing, whether you're a chemist or whether you're in sales. You got to be good at setting goals if you want to achieve extraordinary things. And I think most millennials do want to achieve extraordinary things. Now, they want to achieve extraordinary things that are consistent with their purpose, right? Which I think is brilliant. And then the last thing they need to do is to learn how do you actually build a network of people that'll work for you, no matter what. And that is one where we're not teaching them that in college. You and I actually, got together when I came to Arizona State in their MBA program and talked about how do you build a network of relationships that work for you. But most schools don't teach that.
No.
And I think as millennials get more power in the workplace in more managerial, senior leadership roles, they'll understand how important that is.
So from two perspectives here. So one being the CEO of a very successful company and a good businessman, what do you think companies, corporations, large or small, should be doing to help this transition or to really bridge that gap in communication? So that first. And then two, from a mentor perspective, as you're my mentor and several other people's mentors, bestowing your wonderful wisdom on us all the time, what should millennials do to help themselves kind of either change the stereotype or also kind of help bridge that communication gap and that mindset kind of fix that stereotype?
Right. Well, I think what companies have to do is what they've always had to do, which is to educate their workforce. And I don't think they do that. And I don't think they spend enough time talking about what are the differences generationally. For example, the millennial generation, which is addicted to tattoos, okay, which is fine because it's exactly the same generation that we had in World War II. Mm-hmm. And if you look at those generations, there are unbelievable parallels. And so part of it is educating people about why these generations repeat. And generations do repeat. The only time in our history where generations didn't repeat in sequence was during the Civil War when 600,000 people lost their lives and it completely messed up the population. So, the millennial generation is fairly predictable in terms of some of its behavior. What's not predictable is how they look at technology differently. They look at work differently. Mm-hmm. And I think what you have to do is you have to educate on both sides. So the millennials need to understand the boomers better, and the boomers and the Generation Xers need to understand the millennials better. But that's an educational process. And so once you get people to have an open mind, and I think the larger question here to me is we are not very good as a society, we're certainly not very good in business, at getting people to keep an open mind to really try and understand the other person. The millennials that work for me, and I have, probably 7 or 8 of them at any given point in time, and I mentor 4 college basketball coaches, which exposes me to 60, mm-hmm. Millennials every single year, and they're all different. They're the hardest working people I know. But they don't think of, now the athletes have to do what the coaches tell them, but the millennials who work for me, they're just as happy and frankly efficient doing this at home and on their time. What do I care if they work 10 hours a day if the 10 hours start at 10 o'clock at night and ends at 4 in the morning? Why do I care? I mean, I shouldn't care. And if I'm a traditionalist, I will care. So I think there's a big education thing that's got to take place. I think the concept that we need to drive home for, in any culture that you try to create is, one is, how do you have more understanding? And secondly, how do you get people to focus on learning so that I can continue to learn more? And then the third thing is, how do I get people to understand each other? There's not much understanding that goes on. We basically have created this, this bipolar society, for lack of a better term, which basically says if you don't agree with what I believe in, then something wrong with you, which is total nonsense. So the companies, to me, it's an education thing. That's a long-winded answer, but it really should focus on how do we create more open minds and more understanding, and really trying to understand who these people are. Now, as individuals, my advice is to do the same thing, is to educate yourself. If I'm a millennial, I probably ought to get a boomer or a Generation Xer as a mentor, because if you want to learn how the other generation thinks, then the easiest way to do that is to find somebody that you like, trust, respect, and admire, and pick their brain about how do people like you think. Now, I have, a 32-year-old person who I consider as a mentor, and I have you, who I rely on for all kinds of things, advice and guidance about your generation. Now, why do I do that? Not just because I like it. I do it because I learn from you. And so I'm a big believer that you should have in your life people that you can learn from. And you shouldn't care how old they are. You shouldn't care, what color they are, what their religion is. What you should ask yourself is, can I learn from them? And I think boomers need, and particularly people in senior levels, need to actually have millennials that they talk to openly, transparently about, how does your generation think? What kind of thing as a leader could I do? It just all goes back to thinking like a customer. If your workforce is millennials, they're your customer. So why not try and understand them? The easiest way to understand them is have a real relationship with some of them where they can educate you about how they think. So it all goes back to education, either self-education or organizational education.
Yeah, that's a good point. So for people that are looking for mentors, you luckily fell in my lap, and that was wonderful. But what about people that don't have someone to turn to necessarily? What kind of advice would you give to people like me, for example, that would want to go out and say, okay, I believe that you're right from a mentor perspective. I need somebody who is older and from a different generation that has that knowledge and that wisdom and the life experience, and that still might understand my perspective and be able to talk to me not in a condescending way. That's my favorite thing about you, is that you're very accessible and it's never condescending. I could tell you I've done the dumbest thing in the world and you would just kind of gloss over it and be like, okay, well, how are we going to move forward from this? How do people find other people like that? Because I don't think that everyone in your generation wants to necessarily help millennials like you do.
Well, I'm going to argue with you a little bit, because I think that you're misrepresenting how we connected. Because I didn't fall in your lap. You fell in mine. And to me, this is the exact point that I want people to make. If you want a relationship with somebody that you think you can learn from, the easiest thing to do is ask them for it. I spoke to that group in Phoenix, and there were 50 people in the room. The only person who came up to me and said, I want to have a relationship with you, I'd like to learn from you, can we get together for breakfast or lunch or whatever you said, was you. Now, I'm a big believer that we should teach other people the things that we know. I'm a big believer that if someone asks me for help, I should give it to them. You asked for help. Now, you could have had one breakfast with me or one lunch, whatever we had, and then that would have been the end of it. That's not what you did. What you did was you somehow or another made a conscious decision that you would benefit from having a relationship. And then you wake up 6 years later and we're working together. So I think that the real message for anybody is, if you have somebody that you want a relationship with that you think you can learn from, the best thing to do is simply ask them. Now, what you said to me is how you would ask them. Look, I think I would benefit from having a relationship with somebody like you who could teach me things that you know. You've plowed ground I have not plowed, but I want to plow, and I'd like to learn from that. The average person who's giving is going to say yes, because you elevate me when you ask me for help. And so I think that my advice is to find people that you want these relationships with, and then ask them. Now, you're going to ask some people who are going to say no. You're going to ask some people who will meet with you one time and won't meet with you again. Mm-hmm. You're going to ask people that see you twice and then they won't return your calls because they're busy or whatnot. And what do you learn? You learn that's not the person for me. What you're going to find if you persist is somebody who actually is intently, keenly interested in helping you succeed as long as you want to succeed. But you have to carry that relationship. Right? Now, it's a two-way relationship, and I call you and you call me, but I don't know when you need specific guidance or advice from me. What kind of wisdom do you want to see if I have any, knowledge about? So you have to carry that. And I think part of it is millennials, because they're younger, might look at people who are 15, 20, 30, 40 years older than they are and say, golly, what would I have to offer that person? Or would that person really want to mess with me, mentor me? Do they have time because they're busy? And my thing is, don't make those decisions for other people. If you want someone to mentor you, ask them. Give them a chance to say, I don't have time. I say yes to, anybody who asks me. I had somebody call me recently and say, would you mentor me? Yeah. How many people do you mentor? I said, I don't know, maybe 12. And, but I mean, the truth is it's all driven by them. So to me, the big thing is millennials ought to be looking for people to help them succeed. None of us succeeds alone. None of us. In fact, I say in life, the only two times you're truly alone is when you're born and when you die, and even then you got a whole bunch of people hanging around. And so the reality is success in life is a very plural experience. So why not find people to make that experience compounded by having people in your life who can help you be successful? The only way to find out is to ask them.
Okay. So let's say you don't have someone in particular, what advice would you give to go and find someone that is not necessarily readily available or standing in front of you in your Toastmasters group?
Well, I think you have to to me, this is about how do you get involved in life? Because the way you actually, find a mentor is you get involved in things like we had lunch today with, the big shot with the JCs here in Dallas, right? If I'm young, I get involved in the JCs. You'll find leaders there. You'll find people who come to speak to the JCs. You have to put yourself in situations where you're going to find people that are leaders and that are givers. Because the best mentors are leaders and they're givers. They're both. And their mental mindset is that if I give, I get. They believe that the universal truth is if I give, I get. Now, I don't know where the getting's coming from, but I know that if I give, it's what Zig Ziglar said, you get everything in life you want if you help enough other people get what they want. So you have to put yourself out there. I tell people all the time, you can't take advantage of a network that you're not in. So be intentional about building a network and putting yourself in volunteer places are the very best places. Volunteer for the Red Cross, volunteer for the United Way, volunteer for the JCs, anything philanthropic, volunteer for your local museum. You will meet people that are givers because that's where they are. The givers are doing volunteer work. The givers are on the boards of charities. The givers are on the boards of schools. That's who the givers are. So put yourself in those situations and then find somebody through that effort that ultimately you think you would communicate well with, and then ask them.
Okay.
But it's the big thing. If you want your ship to come in, send one out. Most people don't send one out. They're waiting for the mentor to find them. And that's not how life works. You have to go find them. Now the only mentor, the great mentors in my life were people that either were my coach or they were people that I worked for. And so I was lucky. I had the three best bosses in the history of the world, and every single one of them contributed something dramatic to my success. And I'd be nothing without Jim Crutchfield, Gene Vesna, and Don Cutcliffe. But the guy who got me started was Bud Garrett. And Bud's 90 now, and Bud was my junior high school football coach, and he saw something in me that I didn't. I was a punk. I was a thug when I was 13. I was smoking, drinking, got arrested for shoplifting. And I was not going anywhere fast.
You're my mentor. You're not supposed to be.
Listen, that was 55 years ago, so I have overcome that. But I met Bud, and Bud said, boy, you need to be playing football. And I never played football in my life, and I went after football because he scared me. And but he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and I became a very good athlete and wound up going to college on a football scholarship. And none of that would have happened if I hadn't had Bud. Now, Bud was Mr. Tough Love. He was really Mr. Tough Love, which is exactly what I needed when I was a punk. Mm-hmm. So they did land in my lap, and I'm proud of that. But I try and tell audiences that I talk to that you have to find your own Bud Garrett, and you do have to find them. But the best place to find them are in places where leaders and givers are likely to meet, and that's usually in charities, philanthropic organizations.
Great. So kind of coming full circle back to the workforce piece. So you find a mentor. Hopefully they help you navigate through the trials and tribulations of life and work life. What's your first step to kind of establish yourself to mentor somebody else later on? And aside from taking everything you learned and wanting to give back. So I'm in my early 30s, and I would love to mentor people because I would love to do what you have done for me and guess what, you're stuck with me, which you're going to continue to do for me. What kind of advice do you say on finding people that need you?
Well, I think there's people who need you now. I mean, I need you now. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I asked you to come to work for us, so you could help me actually do this. So I think the first thing is don't sell yourself short. Don't believe that because you're young that you don't have wisdom to impart, because I think that's dead wrong. I think now what you have to be is self-aware. So what am I really, really good at? What level of expertise have I gained? Now, I would actually decide very early in my life if I had it to do over again. I don't have it to do over again. I would try and decide what do I want to be an expert in. And by the time I was 30, I'd be an expert in it. And then I could mentor anybody who wanted expertise in that area. But I also think that the easiest thing to do is to start mentoring kids who are a lot younger than you are. So if you're 31 or whatever, then it's probably not very hard to mentor people that are 15, 16, 17. It's probably harder to mentor somebody who's 29. But I think there's lots of opportunities to mentor kids who need an awful lot of help that are in, high school or that are, young in college and really need to understand how does somebody like you get a college degree from a good university, go out into the workforce, come back and make the sacrifices necessary to get an MBA, take on all this student loan, and be successful. I think there's a boatload of stuff that you could teach people about, what are the things, the qualities, the characteristics, the attributes of people that it takes. And so I think you're capable of mentoring people right now. I just think you got to put yourself in a position where people would want to ask for you, which means you got to do exactly what I'm telling everybody else. You got to get involved in the JCs. You got to get involved in philanthropic things where you'll have that opportunity. So is that everything about millennials?
I mean, I could talk to you for days about millennials and have you drop your knowledge and your wisdom on me, but that's definitely a good starting point. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, my advice to millennials is, be who you are. The thing that makes millennials great is this combination of my passion for purpose and my desire to use technology for efficiency and effectiveness. And it's that marriage that will make millennials the greatest economic contributors in our society's history, I believe. And you already have lots of examples. You just pick up, Fast Company this week of the 50 best companies in the world, see how many of them are started and run by millennials. So I think what's going to happen is that's going to have an exponential effect when millennials are 70, 80, 90% of the workforce. But you can't be successful if, number one, you're not persuasive. Number two, you don't build a network of relationships that can actually be your megaphone to the world for either a job or an opportunity. And millennials have not had the opportunity, in my mind, to learn that. I would learn that. Now, I've written 3 books about that, so I'm a bit biased. I've got an app that I'm introducing called Really Linked, which I think makes it very easy to do that because I think it's a need, but I think it's something that millennials need to do. And then I think millennials need to learn how to set and achieve stretch goals. They have this incalculable capacity for exceptional excellence in whatever they do. And the only way that you can effectively harness that is to have a vision that is consistent with what your gifts and talents are. And most people don't really understand that because they don't understand, how do you set and achieve stretch goals. So I think millennials have got an awful lot to learn. I think a lot of them are going to learn it on their own because it's just who they are. But I think if we could more intentionally get them to pursue these things, that would accelerate the impact that they have on society. And all of that impact, if it's economic, and which is what I believe it will be, it just has so many downstream effects. It'll affect philanthropy, it'll affect education, it'll affect unemployment, it'll affect race relations, it'll affect everything. So Thank you, Donna Mostrom, for being with us. It was a great guest host. I love this discussion about millennials. I've spent a lot of time. I live with one. Actually, I got one that I'm trying to find a pill to fix him. But I love him to pieces, and he is so passionate about the things that he loves. He built a boat in our barn. He built a crossbow. He built a catapult. And I can't pump my own gas. But I'm so excited about the contribution he's going to make to this world. What I want millennials to really understand is, golly, go find a mentor that can help you bring out the greatness that's within you. There's greatness in each and every one of us. And if you find a mentor, if you find someone who is a catalyst for your greatness, then you can do what you're supposed to do, which is be incredible.
You're listening to RNCN, the digital destination for premium talk radio.